tell the story of God and man, of Mary and Joseph and Bethlehem. Rhythms on a donkey ride, a journey for the mother and the child inside. Hallelujah.
Good morning. Today, Virginia and I would like to talk about one of the most important questions in the world. In fact, the question is, what can you and I do, Virginia and I and you, to make the world a better place? Maybe we can just start off by Virginia telling you a tiny bit about herself. I'm a retired banker and corporate executive and now a gardener at my lovely place along the Pacific coast. Virginia?
I am Paul's neighbor. I live just down the driveway, literally, and I'm home with my 3 children, small children, and my background is I went to school for journalism and then started to have babies, so I've been recently kind of branching out into social media work and book editing.
Thanks, Virginia. It's always good for people to have a little bit of an idea where we're coming from, and that we can't get all that much accomplished in one conversation, but if we can leave this one question in your mind to think about and maybe discuss with your friends and neighbors, is the question, how can we individuals help to make the world a better place? Almost everybody I've talked to, I'd say over 80%, more like 90% of the people would like to make the world a better place. There's a few people who cop out one way or another, but most people want to make the world a better place. And I will just say, for starters, if you look back to 1840, the average life expectancy for the whole of humanity has doubled since that time. The rates of crime and war have gone down. Medical services have gotten better. So from my perspective, the world has mostly gotten to be a better place, although there are areas left remaining for us to work on. But the question really comes down to who's responsible for fixing anything that goes wrong. And I just want to start off by observing that most of the time in the last 200 years when the world's become better, we didn't have government programs and international programs or anything else. All we had is individual people and a few small companies, and the world kept getting better and better. Mm-hmm. But today, an awful lot of people seem to think that's a responsibility of our government or the United Nations or somebody else. And I'd like to turn that around and say, why don't we look at the 7.5 billion people living in the globe and ask, what could each of us do to make the world a little bit better, particularly starting at our house and our neighborhood and our friends and whatever. Mm-hmm. Virginia, what would you think in terms of things that you have been doing or trying to do, or anything in that area that you think might help to contribute to making the world a little bit better?
Well, if I could actually I have this thought in my mind that I really want to explore, but to just go back to what you were saying about whose responsibility is it to make the world a better place. And, in the past not even in the past, even at present, we look to our governments as like it's up to them to, put in place the right social programs or, direct the right funding or. And I think that is often it's needed for sure, but I think it's also a bit of a cop-out for us being motivated. Like, I think we need to take, responsibility for our local community right here around us. What's in your, down the street from you, and the people that are there, that might have just moved in from another country, and making them feel welcome. I mean, we talked about this whole idea of treating your neighbors as potential friends or as family even. And I think that goes a long way in just making the world a better place, instead of, everybody just kind of staying in this comfortable, not even comfortable, but just this complacent, like, oh, I'm just gonna manage me and my household, and that's about all I can do. But I think we need to be pushed out of our comfort zone and motivated to and empowered to know that things like, there was a campaign a little while ago about, how a smile can totally change a person's day. And it really, I mean, I had a friend tell me that this morning, that this one time I smiled at them, and it made such a big difference in just their, like, took their direction from feeling like, to like, oh, she saw me, and I feel blessed by that. So, yeah, to bring it back to your question, I think things like, being seeing everybody around you as potential friend, and treating them as you would treat, a beloved family member is a great place to start.
Yeah, and we'll get back around to that maybe just a little bit later. I mean, I can give an example in the swimming pool. Everybody admires the really young, athletic bodies, but I noticed an older lady who looked old in her face and a little bit too heavy, so she was wearing a shirt over her swimsuit, and not many people were talking to her. And I just said hello to her, and she sort of looked up in surprise, because she's used to sort of disappearing into the background.
Yeah.
And every person that we can bring out and make them feel human is
Yes.
already a step forward in making the world a better place.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and like you said, it's you see them, and they feel seen. They feel like they're not just invisible, And I think we can all, think of times when we're going out and we're, just in our sweats or whatever, and you can kind of fly under the radar, and I know I do that sometimes on purpose. But then, if you take a shower and you put on some nice wares, and all of a sudden it's a bit of a different world, and it's just, that dress to impress thing.
Yeah.
It has some clout to it. Yeah.
Well, obviously, the world is such a big thing that we aren't going to even begin to come up with a list. But to put the question out is already, I think, something that's helpful. Mm-hmm. And if you think me times 7.5 billion, then suddenly it becomes more powerful. So, for example, some of you know that when I was 5, I had a dreadful disease called polio, which thankfully is now extinct, or virtually extinct in the planet. But it left me walking with crutches the rest of my life. And instead of becoming a victim and depending on others to support me, I became a business person, and now I can help support other people. Mm-hmm. And I think, if you multiply that times something, every person who takes care of themselves, takes care of their family, takes care of their neighbors, or contributes to them, is already making the world a better place. And you may think of it, well, they're only looking after themselves, but I mean, I would go up to the upper extreme and say when Bill Gates and Warren Buffett give away $50 to $75 billion each, which is almost all their property, to help make the world a better place, that's fantastic too. I mean, for us, if we can give away 1,000 or some other smaller sum, we're already doing what we can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think to add on to that, I had this thought about what do you do if you are in a dark place? Like, so I know so many people that struggle with, anxiety or depression on various levels, and how do you, where do you begin to turn that knowledge into action? What are some actual steps that you can take to do that? Because it's one thing to be like, oh, take care of yourself, but if you're just in this rut of life, what's one thing you can do to start changing that pattern?
Well, I've noticed this in myself, and I've heard it from a number of other people, is if I feel really down and depressed, and then I go out and do something good for another person, it lifts my spirits probably even more than if somebody comes and does something for me.
Yeah.
And so I think when we try to make a better world, it lifts our spirits. Now, there are people, and will always be people, who are at the margins and have no way of helping themselves, and with all the treatment that is available. But they're more like 1% of the population. They're not like half of the population. All of us have ups and downs, that's clear. But people who are permanently stuck in such a place, I look at people like Stephen Hawking, who should, by all rights, have been a helpless victim and died in his early 20s, and yet he became probably the greatest scientist of his day.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think many of us, if we would just have hope and vision and a dream, we could do so much more.
And the people that we surround ourselves with too. I don't think a lot can change if we are surrounded with people who are negative, people who are just down and out all the time. Like, I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who lift you up and who fuel your flame, like that add to that feeds your soul. It's really important.
No, absolutely. We need close friends and neighbors to support us as we support them. Without that kind of sort of backdrop, most of us alone can't really do all that much. We work best in community. We don't work best as a lone ranger.
What's that saying? Think globally, act locally.
Right. Yeah. That's really it. I think the one thing I have two things that I would like to say. One is I think a lot of people have become a little bit caught by the thought that what matters most is if you vote Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, and that's going to make all the difference. And personally, having studied political science at Harvard and have watched governments come and go for 60 years, I don't think that's all that important, certainly not compared to what every citizen in a country does. Whatever government is in power today, blink about 7 times, and it'll be another one that you can complain about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so I really think we should not get obsessed with thinking that changing our voter card or our political identity is going to solve the world's problems. That to me seems like a really big cop-out, and it's one that seems to be very much in vogue, particularly on social media and so on, that we're spending all our time dreaming that if only we had a different president or we had a different prime minister, things would all be better. But I've never seen that happen.
What are your thoughts on the ability of any given person to connect their, we've talked about this idea of connecting your mind and your spirit, your heart, brain, heart, mind connection.
Yeah.
And because for myself anyway, I've felt that the last couple of years, the more that I've done that, like it's a bit of a journey of learning how to be more quiet and meditative. And I find that the more that I do that, the more I become more confident of what my inner wisdom is saying, and it's like I think that there's this beacon of truth that really shines into our souls if we spend the time cultivating it.
Yeah.
And so in this world where things are so fast paced and there's just things coming at us from every direction and so many demands, we almost like it gets subdued, that inner wisdom. And how do we tap into it? But again, I think it's like taking time to be quiet and reflective, because I think then we could be like, oh, it's not just whether I voted Democrat or Republican, and knowing that it's more about what's our value system, like what's motivating us to vote that way, right?
I think we can do a whole separate episode about what we believe and why we believe, but I'd just like to affirm what you said. There is what traditionally has been called heart feelings and emotions, and then there's mind and logic. But I met a brilliant scientist, Ian McGilchrist, who you can find on the internet easily, who wrote a book. Essentially, he's a brain scientist, saying that we have two hemispheres of our brain, and the left hemisphere does what we've always connected with, rational thought and analysis and everything else, whereas the right hemisphere is the part that would have been described in times past as heart. I mean, the heart beats and makes you feel differently, but the whole right hemisphere looks at things from a completely different angle that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
And when we don't tap into that, we're losing a huge amount of what's out there.
Right.
And I guess going with that, I think being close to nature and being close to silence helps to promote a healthier worldview.
And it's a form of self-care, right? Which
Yeah.
is what the basis of this discussion is starting with, taking care of yourself, and then in doing that, you're able to give to others and to make your world a better place.
Absolutely. Anyway, I just want to end with one other thing that I think is equally important, and that is we can do things with people who are either far away, like our family supports some little children very poor in Africa through World Vision. But these days we're finding more and more strangers coming into our community. And right now my wife is tutoring a young Korean man who doesn't speak enough English to get a good job. And how we deal with people from completely different backgrounds has a huge amount to whether we have a world of hate and confrontation and violence, or whether we're willing to stretch our viewpoint to include the stranger, the other person who's from a completely different world, and reach out to them.
Yes. Maybe somewhat of a stretch in our culture where there's so much, questioning of, well, we don't know what they're about, and all we've heard, through different sources of media is that, we should be on guard or whatever.
Yeah, those people might be
suspicious,
dangerous.
what all that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the data that I've seen is there's only a fragment as much violence created by so-called terrorists from other countries as what we do to ourselves, of shootings in the school and murder on the highway with cars and all the other ways to go. But it sometimes catches the mass imagination, or politicians exploit it as a way to do whatever. And I'm not saying that in a global world that we have to have 100% open immigration and that there can't be any rules within countries. The rate that we can absorb change, Europe has taken in millions upon millions of refugees, and they're still taking in more. But that flow has to be a little bit regulated so that the local population learns how to absorb them. But I think the overall idea is that we should gradually be moving more toward viewing everybody on the planet as our brother and our sister, our grandparent or our grandchild.
That's a really, really beautiful picture. It's quite utopian, but I mean, I think it's completely doable. It's very possible.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the way the world has gone. I actually think not only are we richer, but I may have mentioned this before, the amount of torture and so on in the world has gone hugely down. I remember visiting some English castles and seeing their dungeons and torture rooms with all the instruments that only a few centuries ago was just commonplace to whip people and torture them and cut off their hands and everything else. I really think the world is becoming a better place, but we shouldn't stop with the job half done.
Yes.
Anyway, I hope that our few comments may have made you curious, and maybe it will cause you to look for more information and discuss this with other people. And if I can leave the thought that you and I can make a difference in our own community and also further away, that would make me happy.
Yeah, and if you would like to leave in the comments below ways that you're making the world a better place, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening and joining us this time.
And if you want to email us, there is an email, blackberryabbeyconversations@gmail.com.
All right, till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.